What if I told you that Oppenheimer is actually a superhero movie, but not the kind you are used to? Not a story about becoming a hero, a story about creating something the world will never be able to control again. Because beneath all the history and politics, the film follows a strangely familiar structure. An exceptional mind, a discovery of power, a moment where everything changes. But unlike most superhero stories, this time there is no one in control of what comes next. We don't usually connect nuclear physics with comic book storytelling, and that's what makes Oppenheimer feel so different. It takes a structure we usually associate with myths, superhero movies, and fantasy, and then quietly breaks it. An anti-superhero origin story. Every origin story starts the same way. Someone doesn't fit the world around them. Peter Parker, Bruce Wayne, and Oppenheimer is no different. He is introduced the same way. Not as a soldier, not as politician, but as a mind operating on a completely different level. He is isolated, brilliant, detached. And in most superhero stories, this is where potential begins. But here's the first break in the pattern. In most superhero stories, ability stays tied to the person who has it. But in Oppenheimer, intelligence doesn't stay personal. It turns into something bigger than individual. His ideas don't just define him, they reshape the world around him. And once that happens, the consequences are no longer his to control. Every origin story has the moment of transformation, a bite, a suit, a breakthrough. Something changes the human condition. Here it's nuclear physics. But this isn't a transformation of a person. It's the discovery of something that was already true about reality. And that's the key difference. Because superhero stories assume power is something you gain. Oppenheimer suggests something different. Power is not something you gain, it's something you uncover. And once it's uncovered, it doesn't disappear just because you wish it hadn't been found. Every superhero story has a base, a hidden place where impossible things are built. In Oppenheimer, it's Los Alamos. At first, it feels almost exciting. Geniuses gathered in one place, a secret mission, a race against time. It even looks like the setup for a team assembling. But that feeling doesn't last. Because this isn't a story about building something to protect the world. It's a story about building something the world will never be able to fully control again. And that changes the tone of everything that follows. Every origin story builds toward a single moment. The first time power becomes real. Spider-Man swings, Superman flies. In Oppenheimer, that moment is Trinity. And for a brief second, your brain tries to interpret it the same way. Like something has been achieved, like something has been won, but then the film does something different. We don't feel triumph, we sit with the tension. The silence before impact. The sense that something irreversible is about to happen. And then it happens. Light, sound, shock, and then nothing. Not celebration, not relief, just the realization. This is no longer theory, this is reality. In superhero stories, the cost is usually personal, identity, love, normal life, but here the cost spreads outward, because once the bomb exists, it doesn't stay in the hands of its creators. It becomes part of systems, governments, armies, strategy, fear, and something shifts in Oppenheimer's understanding. This isn't the moment he gains power. It's the moment he realizes power no longer belongs to its creator. It shifts to institutions and systems. This is where the comparison starts to break down. Because superhero stories rely on clarity, hero, villain, redemption, fall, but Oppenheimer exists outside of that structure. He is necessary, then dangerous, trusted, then feared, celebrated, then erased. And the film refuses to simplify him. Because that's not the point. The point is what happens when intelligence, politics, and consequence collide at full scale. There are no clean categories left after that. This is why the superhero reading actually works. Not because Nolan had a superhero film in mind when he made it, but because superhero stories are our modern mythology. They are how we understand power. But Oppenheimer takes that mythology and removes the safety net. No clear hero, no moral balance, no undo button. Just cause and effect, accelerating faster than human understanding can process. And in that sense, it becomes something else entirely. Not a story about saving the world, but a story about how the world can change forever without asking permission. So maybe Oppenheimer is not a superhero film in the traditional sense, but it's hard to ignore how closely it mirrors that structure, not to celebrate it, but to take it apart, to show what the story looks like when you remove the fantasy, when power isn't symbolic, but real, and when consequences don't stay contained. In that sense, Oppenheimer feels less like a superhero story and more like its deconstruction. The same structure, the same rise of power, just without the illusion that anyone is in control. And maybe that's why it keeps echoing after it ends. Because instead of imagining what power could look like, it shows us what it already does. So, I'm curious about what you think. Do you see Oppenheimer as a kind of inverted superhero origin story? Or does that comparison completely miss the point? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy this kind of breakdown, where we look at familiar films from a slightly different angle, consider subscribing.